Well, I've managed to find time to get back to my list of horror movies that I discovered on the recommendation of a YouTube video that, yes, I've forgotten who did it. I'm embarrassed by, but, well, what are you going to do? The first one having been, dark, lovely, and deep, which I liked, was interesting. The next up was a movie called Humane, which was directed by Caitlin Cronenberg, yes, the daughter of David Cronenberg. No, the movie is not about any kind of body horror. It's not The Fly. And not about harm to animals. In fact, no animals are harmed. Well, there is a fish. A fish gets harmed. A fish is prepared for dinner in the film. Yeah. So right off the bat, the premise is built on the consequences of climate change. That is used as a plot point here for why the world is the way it is in the plot of this film. There is some amount of preaching in it, but considering the characters and where they're from, there's a guy who used to be a news anchorman on a cable news network and all this sort of thing. So I was like, yeah, I can buy him preaching about it. And the interesting thing about it is when it comes to political sermons and stuff, it's one of those things that can kick you out of a film. And in this current era, it's so easy to do, even though it's rather credibly weaved into it. It's dependent upon the initiative that these people are living under by the state in this film. But on the other hand, the very characters preaching it are just absolute a-holes and are not worth anything. Even ones you thought was rather sympathetic, you find out, nah, not really. There's really only two characters and possibly a third, and I say possibly because she's barely in it, that are, worth saving. So, horror, yes, but more dark comedy is what this film ultimately becomes. I mean, it does get almost slapstick silly towards, the horrible fate that these people find themselves in. So basically the premise is climate change has doomed the planet, and it can no longer sustain the amount of people on the world, or on the world. Where else would they be? And it's basically been a worldwide directive that all governments have to basically thin the herd of their populations, and so they have to meet the goal of how many people they have available based on what resources the planet can produce for them. So, at least in the States, how it goes, they've created a program of where you enlist. Oh, what do you enlist in? Like civil service or the military? No, you enlist to be euthanized. Yes, that's right. And there's posters and there's all kinds of ads about it and about you're heroic and everything to really get people into the movement, Of course, other people are, a lot of people are really upset about this, think it's disgusting. But, what are you going to do? So, we center around this family of the anchorman and his adult children. And he and his wife, their stepmother, have decided to go ahead and enlist. And so they're going to have this final meal together with them. And, the kids are upset. One of them is like a professor who's promoting all of this, but then when he's facing it within his own family, he's like, hey, I can get you out of this. And all this type of stuff, because they're all, hypocrites and a-holes. And obviously they're all a bunch of spoiled brats. One of them had been adopted, and he's the one that is basically the most noble of the batch. But he did some bad things in his past. He was a drug addict. He was in an accident that killed somebody. He's been left lame since that, but he's overcome his addiction, and he's got a girlfriend. Now, she plays a role in this, but she's barely in the film, but that's the other character that's, worth saving here. The third character that's worth saving is one of the children has a daughter. This would be his niece, and of course she's innocent. She's a kid. But that's it. Everybody else are just, there's no one to root for, really. But ultimately, with the parents, the father's on board, but his wife at the last minute runs away, leaving a note saying she can't go through with it. So the father, he's going to go through with it. The service arrives at his house. They go door to door and say, "Don't worry, we'll take the body and handle it for you." But the problem is, he needs two bodies, and he says, "Well, since your stepmother split, I'm going to need one of you guys to pick one of you out of your family to go along with Dad's body, And so, oh boy, the zaniness ensues. So of course they start trying to kill each other, and that's where it gets, and it does get into comical slapstick almost. At that point, and I get it and I understand it, and they become more increasingly over the top with how nasty people they are in this, but at times it grows to stretch credulity, even though they're in this fantastic, not fantastic, but bizarre scenario. Even though, well, I tell you, these days, crazy things happening, something like this, it might occur, so, but anyway, that kind of also, it goes a little too silly, where it kind of pushes you out of it, at least for me, anyway. But ultimately, it's the commentary on inhumanity to humanity and stuff like that. I mean, it's in the title itself, and of course, I suppose ultimately it says, well, you should have paid attention to climate change, it wouldn't come to this, and that sort of thing. But there again, look who's preaching it. And most of these guys, especially in the positions they were, an arrogant professor, a news media anchorman. But anyway, and the ending, of course, there's a few slights here, and then you got to stay through the credits to see exactly what happened, that kind of thing. So there's interesting aspects to it. Some elements of the premise about, the world going mad and that sort of thing sort of reminded me of Soylent Green in that situation. Now, Soylent Green is infinitely superior to this film. Just on this list of these new horror films that just came out within the year, I think so, or late last year, and that was the premise of this. But Dark, Lovely, and Deep was much better than this one. So there's some stumbles here and there, but not all the humor lands, in my opinion. But it's more dark comedy than horror. But there's a few things here and there that might be worth your while. As for me, I wasn't that wowed by it, so I can't recommend it completely. However, there are certain elements of it I respect, and the simplicity and some means by which it's able to achieve a fairly coherent narrative that has some intrigue to it, in the sense that it all takes place in a house for the most part. There's a few shots around town and that kind of thing. There's a bunch of media stuff explaining how the world is, and all of that, and doing things like that without requiring massive budgets and whatnot, and yet still deliver something, well, certainly more compelling than the big budget movies I've seen of late. So I'll give it that. But that's kind of the interest I'm taking in this, about what's the future of the medium, with the devastation that the woke era has had on Hollywood and that sort of thing. And that horror movies tend to be where people hone their craft and learn filmmaking and whatnot. It has been that way for a long time. And a lot of times, just on a literal shoestring budget and some friends and whatnot, you can craft a fairly decent horror movie just in someone's house, or in your backyard, provided you're interested in story and can pull that off. And so, looking at these is an interest of getting away from the rigmarole that from the machine that just doesn't seem to be able to do it anymore. So I don't think this one was all that successful, but it has its interesting elements to it. And even though I'm not that crazy about it, I can see where some people might take to it. So there you go. Humane! And there's very little humane in it, but you know, sure, it's dark comedy, but it's also a horror movie.